Sarah Martinez walked through the parking garage with her 5-year-old son Tommy's hand firmly in hers. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the concrete pillars. She had just finished grocery shopping at the downtown market, and her car was parked on the third level of the underground garage. Tommy swung their joined hands back and forth, chattering about the toy airplane he had seen in the store.
"Mom, can we get it next time?"
It was blue and silver, just like the planes that fly over our house. "We'll see, sweetheart," Sarah replied, her eyes automatically scanning their surroundings. The garage was mostly empty at this hour, just before closing time. Only a few cars remained scattered across the vast concrete expanse. Her military training had never really left her, even though she had been out of service for 6 years now. Sarah had spent 8 years in the Navy, including 2 years of specialized training that most people would never know about. She had been part of an elite program, one that pushed human limits and created individuals capable of handling situations that would break most people. But that was her past life. Now she was just a single mother working as a physical therapist, trying to give her son a normal childhood. As they approached her Honda Civic, Sarah noticed 3 men standing near a white van parked 2 spaces away from her car. Something about their positioning made her instincts sharpen. They weren't just casually talking. Their body language suggested they were waiting for something. Or someone. The first man was tall and thin with greasy black hair. He wore a dirty baseball cap and kept looking around nervously. The second was shorter but broader, with thick arms covered in tattoos that looked like they had been done in prison. The third man seemed to be their leader. He was middle-aged with a gray beard and cold eyes that reminded Sarah of sharks she had encountered during underwater training. Sarah slowed her pace slightly, keeping Tommy close to her side. Her free hand moved instinctively toward her purse, where she kept her keys and pepper spray. She had hoped never to need those old skills again, but the way these men were positioned told her that this might not be a random encounter.
"Mom, why are we walking so slow?" Tommy asked, tugging on her hand.
"Just being careful, baby," Sarah whispered, forcing herself to smile down at him.
"Stay close to Mommy, okay?"
As they got within 10 feet of her car, the leader of the 3 men stepped forward. He was blocking the path to her driver's side door. His companions moved to flank them, cutting off easy escape routes.
Sarah's heart rate increased, but her breathing remained steady.
She had been in worse situations than this. "Excuse me, lady," the leader said, his voice rough from years of cigarettes.
"We need to talk to you about something."
Sarah stopped walking but kept Tommy slightly behind her.
"I don't think we have anything to discuss."
"Please move away from my car." The man laughed, but there was no humor in it.
"Oh, but we do have something to discuss.
See, my friend here says you cost him his job a few weeks ago. Says you got him fired from the construction site where you work."
Sarah's mind raced.
She did work at a rehabilitation center that contracted with several construction companies to provide physical therapy for injured workers. 3 weeks ago, she had reported a man who was clearly faking his back injury to collect workers' compensation. The man had been terminated and his benefits cut off. If someone was terminated, it was because they were defrauding the system, Sarah said calmly.
"That's not my problem."
The tattooed man stepped closer, his face twisted with anger. "That was my cousin, lady. And, because of you, he lost his benefits and his job.
His family's got no money now." Sarah could smell alcohol on his breath.
Day drinking made people unpredictable and dangerous. She kept her voice steady and non-threatening while her mind calculated distances and angles. "I'm sorry your cousin lost his job, but insurance fraud hurts everyone. Now please step aside so my son and I can leave." The leader shook his head slowly. "I don't think you understand the situation here. See, we think you owe my friend's family some compensation for the trouble you caused. Maybe whatever's in your purse, plus whatever you can get from an ATM." Tommy pressed closer to Sarah's leg. He was smart enough to sense the danger, even if he didn't fully understand what was happening.
Sarah could feel him trembling slightly against her thigh. "Mom?" Tommy whispered.
It's okay, baby, Sarah said softly, never taking her eyes off the three men. These men are just confused about something. The third man, who had been quiet until now, laughed nastily.
Confused? Lady, the only one who's confused here is you. You think because you're in a public place with your kid, we won't do what needs to be done? Sarah's training kicked into high gear.
She assessed the threat level, catalogued potential weapons, and calculated her options. The men had positioned themselves in a triangle formation, probably without realizing it. It was actually a tactical mistake that she could exploit if necessary. The parking garage had security cameras, but she could see that the men had chosen their spot carefully. They were in a blind spot between two concrete pillars, where the camera angles wouldn't capture clear footage of what was happening. Look, Sarah said, trying one more time to de-escalate the situation. I understand you're upset, but threatening a woman and child isn't going to solve your cousin's problems. Why don't you let us leave, and you can file a complaint with my employer through proper channels. The leader stepped even closer, now just arm's length away. The time for proper channels is over, sweetheart. Your little report cost a good man his livelihood. Now it's time for you to pay up. Sarah noticed that the man's hands were shaking slightly. He was nervous, which made him more dangerous. Nervous people made mistakes, but they also did unpredictable things. Daddy always told us that insurance cheaters were bad people, the tattooed man added. But he also taught us that people who rat out their neighbors are worse. Tommy tugged on Sarah's jacket. Mom, I'm scared. The sound of her son's frightened voice changed something in Sarah. The part of her that had been trying to handle this diplomatically stepped back, and the part of her that had been forged in the crucible of military training stepped forward. Tommy, Sarah said quietly, her voice taking on a different quality. I want you to walk over to that blue car behind us and sit down next to the tire. Can you do that for me? But, Mom, now, Tommy. Something in her tone made her son obey immediately. He had never heard his mother speak like that before, with such absolute authority and confidence. Tommy walked to the blue car and sat down exactly where his mother had told him to. The leader of the three men watched this exchange with growing irritation. Hey, we're not done talking here. Bring the kid back. Sarah turned to face him fully, her posture subtly shifting. To most observers, she still looked like an ordinary mother in jeans and a sweater. But her weight was now balanced on the balls of her feet, her hands were loose and ready, and her eyes had taken on a quality that would have been recognizable to anyone who had served in special operations. Actually, we are done talking, Sarah said, her voice calm but carrying an undertone that made the thin man take a half step backward. You're going to walk away now, and we're going to pretend this conversation never happened. The leader laughed, but it sounded forced now. Lady, I don't think you understand the situation. There's three of us and one of you. And you've got a kid to worry about. Sarah's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You're right about one thing. I do have a kid to worry about. And that means I'm not going to let you walk away if you represent a continued threat to him. The tattooed man was getting impatient. Enough talking. Let's just take her purse and get out of here. He reached towards Sarah's shoulder bag. It was exactly the opening she had been waiting for. Sarah's hand moved faster than any of the three men could follow. She grabbed the tattooed man's wrist, twisted it in a direction wrists weren't meant to go, and used his forward momentum to send him stumbling past her into a concrete pillar. The sound of his forehead hitting concrete echoed through the parking garage. The thin man reacted first, reaching into his jacket for what Sarah assumed was a weapon. She was already moving before his hand cleared his waistband. A quick step forward, a palm strike to his solar plexus, and he was doubled over, gasping for air. The leader stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. His two companions were on the ground, and the suburban mother was standing there looking completely composed. What the hell, he managed to say. Sarah adjusted her purse strap and smoothed down her sweater. I tried to handle this the easy way. You chose the hard way. The tattooed man was groaning and trying to push himself up from the ground. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead where he had hit the pillar. The thin man was still struggling to breathe, making harsh wheezing sounds. The leader pulled out a folding knife and flicked it open.
"You think you're tough? Let's see how tough you are against this." Sarah looked at the knife with professional interest.
It was a cheap gas station blade, probably dull, with a loose handle. Not much of a weapon in trained hands, but potentially dangerous to civilians.
"Put the knife away," Sarah said.
"You're already in enough trouble without adding assault with a deadly weapon to the charges."
"What charges?" the leader snarled. "Who's going to call the cops?" "You."
Sarah pulled out her cell phone.
"Already did.
I hit the emergency call button when you first approached us. The police have been listening to this entire conversation."
It was a bluff, but a convincing one.
The leader's eyes widened slightly, and Sarah could see him reconsidering his options.
"You're lying,"
he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now.
"Am I?" Sarah asked. "Do you really want to find out?"
The tattooed man had managed to sit up, still holding his bleeding head.
"Jimmy, let's get out of here. This is all screwed up." But Jimmy wasn't ready to back down.
He had been planning this confrontation for days, working himself up to it, and he wasn't going to be defeated by one woman, no matter how lucky her first moves had been.
"Nobody makes a fool out of Jimmy Castellanos," he growled, raising the knife. "Especially not some uptight soccer mom." Sarah sighed.
She really had hoped to avoid this next part. Tommy was still sitting by the blue car, his eyes wide as he watched his mother face down three grown men. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could tell that something was very wrong. His mom looked different somehow, like she had when she helped him practice martial arts moves in their backyard, but more serious. The thin man was starting to recover his breath, though he was still bent over with his hands on his knees. The tattooed man was trying to stand up, using the concrete pillar for support. And their leader was advancing on Sarah with a knife in his hand.
Sarah watched Jimmy approach, noting the way he held the blade.
He gripped it like an ice pick, which told her he had probably been in prison fights but had no real knife training. His footwork was sloppy, and he was telegraphing his intentions with his body language.
"Last warning," Sarah said.
"Walk away now, and this ends with just some bumps and bruises." Jimmy lunged forward with the knife, aiming for Sarah's midsection. To Tommy, watching from behind the car, it looked like the bad man was going to hurt his mother.
But Sarah had already moved.
She stepped to the side, caught Jimmy's wrist, and used his own momentum to drive him face-first into the side of her Honda Civic. The knife clattered to the concrete as Jimmy slumped against the car, dazed. The thin man finally straightened up, took one look at his two companions on the ground, and decided he wanted no part of whatever this woman was capable of. He turned and ran for the garage exit, his footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. Sarah watched him go, then looked down at Jimmy, who was sliding down the side of her car to sit heavily on the ground. There was a dent in her car door now, but her insurance would cover it.
"Tommy," she called. "It's safe now. Come here, baby."
Tommy ran to his mother and wrapped his arms around her waist.
"Mom, you were like a superhero."
Sarah hugged her son tightly, feeling her heart rate finally beginning to slow down.
"Not a superhero, sweetheart.
Just someone who learned how to protect the people she loves." The tattooed man was still sitting against the pillar, looking confused and defeated. Jimmy was conscious but not moving, apparently content to lean against the car and nurse what was probably a broken nose. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed 911 for real this time. "Yes, I need to report an attempted robbery in the downtown parking garage. The suspects are detained, but I'll need officers and probably an ambulance." As she gave the dispatcher their location, Sarah looked around the parking garage that had seemed so threatening just minutes before. Now it was just a concrete space with fluorescent lights and a few scattered cars.
The danger had passed.
But, as she held Tommy's hand and waited for the police to arrive, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't really over. Jimmy Castellanos had friends and family, people who might not appreciate what had happened here today.
and the thin man who had run away knew where to find her. For the first time in years, Sarah began to think that maybe it was time to dust off some of her other old skills. The ones that went beyond hand-to-hand combat. The ones that involved staying one step ahead of people who might want to hurt her family. Tommy looked up at his mother with admiration and curiosity. "Mom, how did you learn to do that stuff?" Sarah smiled down at her son, choosing her words carefully. "I used to have a job that required special training. But that's a story for when you're older." In the distance, they could hear sirens approaching. Sarah's regular life as a physical therapist and single mother was about to get much more complicated. Detective Maria Santos arrived at the parking garage 20 minutes after Sarah's call. She was a 15-year veteran of the police force, and she had seen her share of robbery attempts. But something about this case felt different from the moment she stepped out of her patrol car. 3 suspects were sitting on the ground in various states of injury. 2 women from the medical team were checking their conditions. And, standing calmly nearby was a woman in her early 30s wearing jeans and a sweater, holding the hand of a small boy who looked excited rather than traumatized. "You're Sarah Martinez?" Detective Santos asked, approaching with her notebook ready. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. "This is my son Tommy." Detective Santos looked around the scene, taking note of the dent in Sarah's car, the blood on the concrete pillar, and the folding knife that had been bagged as evidence. "Can you walk me through what happened here?" Sarah gave a clear, concise account of the events, sticking to the facts and avoiding any details about her military background. She described the men's approach, their demands, their threats, and her actions in response. "So let me get this straight," Detective Santos said, flipping through her notes. 3 grown men cornered you and your son demanded money, threatened you with a knife, and you managed to subdue 2 of them while the 3rd ran away?" "That's correct," Sarah said. Detective Santos looked at the 3 suspects again. Jimmy Castellanos had a clearly broken nose and was still groggy. The tattooed man, who had identified himself as Rico Morales, had a concussion and required stitches in his forehead. The thin man, Marcus Webb, had been picked up 6 blocks away and was claiming he had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Ms. Martinez, do you have any martial arts training?" the detective asked. "Some," Sarah replied. "I took self-defense classes a few years ago." It wasn't technically a lie. Sarah had taken advanced combat training that included self-defense, among many other skills. But she had learned long ago that the full truth about her background often created more complications than it solved. Detective Santos studied Sarah's face, sensing there was more to the story. But the physical evidence supported Sarah's account, and the suspects weren't claiming she had done anything other than defend herself and her child. "The district attorney will review the case, but I expect you'll be cleared of any wrongdoing," Detective Santos said. "These men have extensive criminal records. Castellanos just got out of prison 3 months ago for armed robbery." As the police finished their investigation and the suspects were loaded into ambulances and patrol cars, Detective Santos handed Sarah her business card. "If you think of anything else, or if anyone contacts you about this incident, please give me a call." Sarah took the card, understanding the unspoken message. The police couldn't provide 24-hour protection, but they wanted to know if the situation escalated. On the drive home, Tommy was full of questions. "Mom, will those bad men go to jail? Are they going to come back? How did you learn to fight like that?" Sarah answered his questions as best she could without revealing too much about her past. She explained that the men would probably go to jail, that the police would make sure they stayed away from their family, and that sometimes mommies and daddies learn special skills to protect their children. But, privately, Sarah was running through threat assessments and contingency plans. Jimmy Castellanos had family and associates who might see this as a matter of honor or revenge. The fact that a woman had humiliated him in front of his crew would only make it worse. That evening, after Tommy was asleep, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and made some phone calls she hadn't made in years. The first call was to her former commanding officer, Captain Jennifer Walsh, who was now stationed in San Diego. Sarah had served under Walsh during her most intensive training periods, and the captain knew exactly what Sarah was capable of.
Sarah Martinez, Captain Walsh said when she answered the phone.
This is a surprise. How's civilian life treating you?
It just got complicated, Sarah said, and explained the day's events. Captain Walsh was quiet for a moment after Sarah finished her account.
How much did the police figure out about your background?
Nothing beyond basic self-defense classes, Sarah replied.
But I'm worried this isn't over.
Smart to be cautious, Walsh agreed.
These kinds of situations can escalate quickly. Do you need resources?
Not yet, Sarah said. But I wanted you to know what was happening, in case things develop further.
Keep me posted. And, Sarah?
Don't hesitate to use every tool in your toolbox if your son's safety is at risk.
The second call was to Marcus Chen, her former teammate who now ran a private security consulting firm in Seattle.
Marcus had served alongside Sarah during some of their most challenging missions, and she trusted his judgment completely.
Martinez,
Marcus said when he heard her voice. Please tell me you're calling to say you're ready to come work for me. Not exactly, Sarah said, and filled him in on the parking garage incident. Marcus whistled low when she finished.
Sounds like you handled it well, but you're right to be concerned about follow-up.
These guys have nothing to lose and everything to prove now.
I'm thinking about taking some precautions, Sarah said.
Maybe changing our routines, being more aware of our surroundings.
Good start, Marcus agreed.
But, if this escalates, you need to consider whether staying in that area is safe for you and Tommy.
I could have a job for you here in Seattle within a week.
Sarah appreciated the offer, but she wasn't ready to uproot Tommy's life just yet. He had friends at school, a routine he was comfortable with, and a sense of stability that had taken years to build after her transition out of the military. Let me see how things develop, she said.
But I appreciate knowing I have options.
The third call was the most difficult. Sarah dialed a number she hadn't used in 4 years, waiting as it rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered.
This is David. Hi, David. It's Sarah.
David Martinez, her ex-husband and Tommy's father, was quiet for a long moment. Their divorce had been amicable but complicated, involving disagreements about Sarah's military career and the demands it placed on their family. David had moved to Phoenix after the divorce and saw Tommy every other month.
Is everything okay? David asked. Is Tommy all right?
Sarah explained the situation, trying to keep emotion out of her voice. David listened without interrupting, which had always been one of his better qualities.
So what are you thinking?
David asked when she finished. I'm thinking that if this situation gets worse, I might need to send Tommy to stay with you for a while, Sarah said.
Just until things settle down.
Of course, David said immediately.
He can come anytime.
But, Sarah, are you sure you're handling this the right way?
Maybe you should consider moving somewhere else, starting over.
It was an old argument between them. David had never fully understood Sarah's commitment to using her skills to help people, even in civilian jobs like physical therapy.
He thought she should have walked away from anything that might involve conflict or danger.
I'm not running away from my life because some criminals made bad choices, Sarah said firmly. But I won't put Tommy at risk either.
Fair enough, David said. Just promise me you'll call if you need anything. And give Tommy my love.
After she hung up, Sarah walked through her house, seeing it with new eyes. She had chosen this neighborhood because it was safe and quiet, with good schools and friendly neighbors. But safety was relative, and her definition of adequate security had changed significantly since the afternoon. Sarah checked all the locks on her doors and windows, made note of sightlines from her house to the street, and considered whether her home security system was sufficient. She also mentally catalogued her emergency supplies and wondered if she should expand her preparations. The next morning, Sarah dropped Tommy off at school and went to work at the rehabilitation center where she had been employed for the past 2 years. Her supervisor, Dr. Patricia Coleman, called her into the office as soon as she arrived. I heard about what happened yesterday, Dr. Coleman said.
Are you and Tommy okay?
We're fine, Sarah replied.
It was just an unfortunate incident. Dr. Coleman looked concerned.
The thing is, Sarah, this incident involved one of our former clients.
That creates some liability issues for the center. Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. What kind of liability issues?
Well, if Rico Morales claims that your report about his condition was incorrect, he could file a lawsuit against us. And if he claims that you attacked him in retaliation for filing a complaint about his treatment, that could be very expensive to defend against.
Sarah stared at her supervisor in disbelief. Rico Morales was clearly committing fraud. And he didn't file any complaint about his treatment.
He and his friends cornered me and my son in a parking garage and demanded money. I understand that, Dr. Coleman said quickly. And I'm not saying his claims would have merit.
But defending against frivolous lawsuits is still expensive.
The board of directors is concerned about our exposure.
Sarah could see where this conversation was heading. Are you firing me? Not firing, Dr. Coleman said.
But we think it might be best if you took some time off while this situation resolves itself. We'll hold your position open, and you'll continue to receive benefits.
It was effectively a suspension, and Sarah knew it.
The rehabilitation center was afraid that keeping her on staff while she was involved in a criminal case would expose them to legal and financial risk.
How long do you expect this suspension to last? Sarah asked.
It's hard to say, Dr. Coleman replied. It depends on how quickly the legal proceedings move forward. Sarah cleaned out her desk and said goodbye to her colleagues, most of whom seemed uncomfortable with the situation. She had been a model employee for 2 years, helping dozens of patients recover from injuries and return to work.
But now she was being treated like a liability.
As she drove home, Sarah considered her options. Her savings could cover her expenses for a few months, but not indefinitely. She could look for another job in physical therapy, but the criminal case would complicate any employment application.
Or she could consider Marcus Chen's offer to work in private security, which would mean relocating to Seattle.
But first, she needed to make sure that she and Tommy were safe. Jimmy Castellanos had been released on bail that morning, according to a text message from Detective Santos. Rico Morales was still in the hospital but would probably be released within a day or two. Marcus Webb had been charged with attempted robbery and released on his own recognizance. All 3 men were back on the street, and Sarah had no doubt that they blamed her for their current troubles. That afternoon, while Tommy was still at school, Sarah drove to a storage unit across town where she kept some items from her military service. She hadn't visited the unit in over a year, but everything was exactly where she had left it. Sarah opened a locked metal box and examined its contents carefully. There were documents with names and phone numbers she might need to contact. There were items that most people would consider unusual for a physical therapist to own. And there were photographs that brought back memories of missions and teammates, some of whom hadn't made it home. Sarah had hoped never to need these resources again. But, as she looked at a picture of her SEAL training class, she reminded herself that those skills had kept her alive in situations far more dangerous than a confrontation with small-time criminals. She selected a few items from the box, locked the storage unit, and drove home to wait for Tommy to return from school. Whatever happened next, she would be ready for it. That evening, as Sarah helped Tommy with his homework, her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she could see a young man she didn't recognize standing on her front porch. He was well-dressed and didn't look threatening, but Sarah's instincts were still on high alert. "Can I help you?" she called through the door without opening it. "Ms. Martinez? My name is Tony Castellanos. I'm Jimmy's nephew. I was hoping we could talk." Sarah felt her blood turn cold. Jimmy's family had found her home address. "I have nothing to discuss with you or anyone in your family." "Please," Tony said. "I'm not here to threaten you or cause trouble. I just want to talk about what happened yesterday." "Mom, who is it?" Tommy called from the kitchen table where he was working on his math homework. "Just a salesman, honey," Sarah replied. "Stay at the table." Sarah studied the young man through the peephole. He appeared to be in his early 20s, with neat hair and clean clothes. His body language didn't suggest immediate threat, but she had learned never to judge danger by appearances. "You have 1 minute to say whatever you came here to say," Sarah called through the door. "My Uncle Jimmy is an idiot," Tony said. "What he did yesterday was stupid and wrong. But he's also all the family I have left. I'm asking you to consider not pressing charges." Sarah was surprised by the approach. She had expected threats or attempts at intimidation, not a polite request for mercy. "Your uncle threatened my child," Sarah replied. "That's not something I'm inclined to forgive." "I understand," Tony said. "And I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm asking you to consider that sending him back to prison won't solve anything. It'll just make things worse for everyone." "How do you figure that?" "Because Jimmy's got friends who think his reputation was damaged by what happened yesterday. If he goes back to prison, they'll feel like they need to do something about it to prove they're still tough." It was exactly what Sarah had been worried about. Jimmy Castellanos might be out of the picture, but his associates would see his defeat as their defeat. And they would want to restore their collective reputation. "What are you proposing?" Sarah asked. "Jimmy moves out of state," Tony said. "He's got a cousin in Nevada who offered him a job. He leaves town, you drop the charges, and this whole thing goes away." Sarah considered the offer. It would eliminate the immediate threat and avoid a lengthy court process that would keep her in the public eye. But it would also send a message that threatening her family came without real consequences. "I'll think about it," Sarah said finally. "Thank you," Tony replied. "I'll come back tomorrow evening for your answer." As Sarah watched Tony Castellanos walk away from her house, she realized that the situation was more complicated than she had initially thought. This wasn't just about 3 criminals who had made a bad decision. It was about family loyalty, street reputation, and the complex dynamics of neighborhood power structures. And somewhere in the middle of all these complications were she and Tommy, just trying to live their lives in peace. Sarah locked her front door and returned to the kitchen where Tommy was struggling with long division. As she sat down to help him with his homework, she found herself thinking about Captain Walsh's advice: don't hesitate to use every tool in your toolbox if your son's safety is at risk. Tomorrow, she would need to make some difficult decisions about exactly which tools might be necessary. Sarah spent most of the night researching Jimmy Castellanos and his associates. Using skills she had learned during intelligence gathering training, she accessed public records, social media profiles, and court documents to build a comprehensive picture of the people who might represent a threat to her family. Jimmy had served 2 separate prison sentences for armed robbery and assault. His associates included Rico Morales, who had multiple arrests for fraud and assault, and Marcus Webb, whose record showed drug dealing and burglary convictions. But more concerning were the names that appeared in their social media connections and court filings. The Castellanos family was part of a larger network of criminals who controlled several blocks of the downtown area where Sarah worked. They were involved in insurance fraud, protection rackets, and drug distribution. Jimmy's older brother Carlos was currently serving a 15-year sentence for manslaughter, but he still had influence on the street through his wife and teenage sons. Tony Castellanos, the young man who had visited her house, appeared to be trying to stay out of the family business. He had a job at an auto repair shop and was taking community college classes. But his social media showed him at family gatherings with people who were clearly involved in criminal activities. Sarah also discovered that Rico Morales had been fired from 3 different construction companies for workers' compensation fraud over the past 5 years. His scheme involved claiming back injuries that prevented him from working, then performing manual labor for cash while collecting disability benefits. Sarah's report had exposed his latest attempt at the same fraud. Most troubling was what Sarah found about Marcus Webb. He had been arrested 6 times in the past 2 years but had only been convicted once. Witnesses in his other cases had either refused to testify or had changed their stories before trial. Webb appeared to be skilled at intimidating people into silence. As the sun came up, Sarah made coffee and sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down her options. Option 1, accept Tony's offer.
Jimmy leaves town, charges are dropped, and the situation theoretically ends. But this sets a precedent that threatening her family brings no real consequences. And there was no guarantee that Jimmy's associates would consider the matter settled. Option 2, proceed with criminal charges and hope the justice system provides adequate protection. But even if the men were convicted, they would eventually be released from prison with even more reason to seek revenge. Option 3, relocate to Seattle and take the job with Marcus Chen. This would remove Tommy from any immediate danger but would uproot his entire life and essentially let criminals drive her out of her home. Option 4, use her specialized skills to eliminate the threat permanently. Sarah had the training and resources to make Jimmy Castellanos and his associates disappear completely. But this would mean crossing a line she had hoped never to cross in civilian life. Sarah was still considering her options when Tommy came downstairs for breakfast, already dressed for school and chattering about a science project involving volcanoes. "Mom, can we make the volcano explode really high?" Tommy asked as he ate his cereal. Jake's older brother said if you use the right chemicals, you can make it go super high. "We'll stick to the safe version with baking soda and vinegar," Sarah said. Sometimes the simple approaches work better than the complicated ones. As she said it, Sarah realized she was talking to herself as much as to Tommy. Maybe the simple approach was the right one: protect her family using whatever methods were necessary, and worry about the consequences later. After dropping Tommy at school, Sarah drove to a different part of town to visit someone she hadn't seen in 3 years. Elena Vasquez lived in a small apartment above her bail bond office, and she had connections throughout the criminal justice system that went back 20 years. Elena had helped Sarah with background checks on some of her physical therapy clients, providing information that wasn't available through normal channels. She was a former police detective who had left the force under circumstances she never discussed, but her network of contacts remained extensive. "Sarah Martinez," Elena said when she opened her door. "You look like someone with serious problems." "I need information about Jimmy Castellanos and his family," Sarah said directly. Elena invited her in and poured 2 cups of strong coffee while Sarah explained the situation. Elena listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes on a small pad. "Castellanos is small time, but he's connected to people who aren't," Elena said when Sarah finished. "His brother Carlos ran a crew that controlled drug distribution on the south side before he got arrested. Jimmy's been trying to rebuild that operation, but he's not smart enough to do it right." "What about his associates?" "Rico Morales is muscle, nothing more. Webb is more dangerous because he's unpredictable. But the real problem is Carlos's wife, Maria Castellanos. She's been holding the organization together while Carlos is in prison. If she decides you're a threat to the family's reputation, she'll send people with more skill than Jimmy's crew." Sarah absorbed this information, adding it to her threat assessment. "What would it take to make this problem go away permanently?" Elena studied her carefully. "That depends on what you mean by permanently. And what you're willing to do to achieve it." "I mean ensuring that my son never has to worry about these people again." "There are legal ways and illegal ways to accomplish that," Elena said. "The legal ways take time and involve risk to you and Tommy while the process plays out. The illegal ways are faster but involve different kinds of risk." Sarah understood the subtext. Elena was offering to help with either approach, but she wanted to know how far Sarah was prepared to go. "Let me think about it," Sarah said. "But I may need your help one way or another." Elena handed her a different business card, one with just a phone number and no name. "This number reaches me 24 hours a day. If you need something done quickly, don't hesitate to call." Sarah left Elena's office with more questions than answers, but at least she now had a clearer picture of the forces she was dealing with. This wasn't just about Jimmy Castellanos and his crude attempt at revenge. It was about a family criminal enterprise that couldn't afford to appear weak. That afternoon, Sarah picked up Tommy from school and took him to the Children's Museum, trying to maintain some normalcy while she processed her options. Tommy ran from exhibit to exhibit, completely absorbed in the interactive displays about space exploration and dinosaurs. "Mom, look at this." Tommy called from a display about the solar system. Did you know that Jupiter has more than 70 moons?
Sarah smiled, watching her son's enthusiasm for learning and exploration.
Tommy was smart, curious, and kind.
He deserved to grow up in a world where he didn't have to worry about criminals seeking revenge against his mother.
As they walked through the museum, Sarah noticed a man in a baseball cap who seemed to be following them at a distance.
He was trying to appear casual, but Sarah's training allowed her to track his movement patterns. He stayed approximately 50 feet behind them, stopping when they stopped and moving when they moved. Sarah led Tommy to the museum's cafeteria and bought him a snack, positioning herself where she could watch the entrance. The man in the baseball cap entered the cafeteria and bought a coffee, then sat at a table where he could observe Sarah and Tommy. Sarah pulled out her phone and discreetly took a picture of the man.
She sent the photo to Elena with a text message, "Need identification. Currently following us." Elena's response came back within 10 minutes, Carlos Webb, Marcus's younger brother.
Armed robbery conviction 2019.
Considered dangerous.
Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Marcus Webb had apparently decided to involve his family in whatever revenge he was planning. And, if Carlos Webb was willing to follow them to a children's museum, he was probably willing to escalate the situation significantly. Sarah finished Tommy's snack and led him toward the museum's exit, keeping track of Carlos Webb's position. As they left the building, Sarah noticed a second man standing near their car in the parking lot. He was trying to look like he was just checking his phone, but his positioning allowed him to see anyone approaching Sarah's Honda Civic.
Sarah changed direction, leading Tommy toward the museum's main entrance instead of the parking lot. "Are we going back inside, Mom?" Tommy asked.
"Just for a minute, baby," Sarah said, pulling out her phone to call Elena's special number.
"Problem?" Elena answered immediately.
"I'm being followed by at least 2 men at the Children's Museum. I need an alternative exit and a safe place to take my son."
"Stay inside the building," Elena said. "Museum security can help until I get there. Give me 20 minutes.
Sarah found a security guard and explained that she was being followed by men who had threatened her family. The guard, a retired police officer named Robert Chen, immediately called for backup and escorted Sarah and Tommy to a secure office behind the information desk.
"Are we in trouble, Mom?" Tommy asked as they waited in the security office.
"No, sweetheart," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice calm. "We're just being extra careful about some people who might want to bother us." Tommy accepted this explanation without further questions, which reminded Sarah how resilient children could be when they trusted the adults in their lives to handle difficult situations. Elena arrived with 2 men who looked like they had military or law enforcement backgrounds. She spoke briefly with museum security, then came to the office where Sarah and Tommy were waiting. "The men who were following you left when they saw our people arrive," Elena said. "But this confirms that the Castellanos family has decided to escalate the situation."
"What's our next move?" Sarah asked.
"That depends on what you've decided about handling this permanently," Elena replied, glancing at Tommy.
Sarah understood that Elena didn't want to discuss operational details in front of her son. "Tommy, why don't you go with Mr. Chen and look at the security monitors?
I bet you can see the whole museum from here." Robert Chen, who clearly understood the situation, smiled at Tommy.
"Come on, young man. Let me show you how we keep everyone safe here." Once Tommy was out of earshot, Elena laid out Sarah's options in stark terms.
"The Castellanos family has made a decision to treat you as a threat to their reputation and their business. Tony's offer yesterday was probably sincere, but he doesn't speak for the whole family. Maria Castellanos has apparently decided that Jimmy's humiliation requires a response."
"What kind of response?" "Best case scenario, they try to intimidate you into leaving town.
Worst case scenario, they decide that eliminating you is necessary to maintain their street credibility." Sarah felt a cold clarity settle over her mind, the same feeling she had experienced before dangerous missions overseas. The time for hoping the situation would resolve itself peacefully had passed. Now it was about protecting Tommy by whatever means necessary. "What resources do you have available?"
Sarah asked. Elena smiled grimly. Whatever resources you need. The question is how far you're willing to go.
Sarah looked through the office window at Tommy, who was excitedly watching the security monitors with Robert Chen. Her son was pointing at different screens and asking questions about the camera angles and monitoring equipment. He was happy and safe and completely unaware that his mother was about to make decisions that would change both of their lives. "I'm willing to go as far as necessary to keep my son safe," Sarah said. "But I want to try one more approach first." "What approach?" "A direct conversation with Maria Castellanos. If she's the one making decisions for the family, maybe I can make her understand that continuing this conflict isn't in anyone's best interest." Elena looked skeptical. Maria Castellanos doesn't negotiate from a position of weakness. And, right now, she thinks she's in a position of strength because you're trying to live a normal civilian life. "Then, maybe it's time to show her that my position is stronger than she realizes," Sarah said. Elena studied her carefully. "You're talking about revealing your background." "I'm talking about having a conversation between professionals," Sarah replied. "One person who protects their family to another person who protects their family." "And, if that conversation doesn't go well?" Sarah's expression hardened slightly. "Then, we move to more direct methods." Elena nodded slowly. "I can arrange a meeting with Maria Castellanos." "But, Sarah, if you're going to do this, you need to be prepared for every possible outcome. Including the outcome where you have to eliminate multiple threats to protect Tommy." Sarah looked at her son again, watching him laugh at something Robert Chen had said about the museum's security system. Tommy's whole world was science projects and playground games and bedtime stories. He had no idea that his mother had once been trained to infiltrate hostile territory and eliminate targets that threatened national security. But maybe it was time to use those skills to protect the most important mission of her life, keeping her son safe and happy. "Set up the meeting," Sarah said. "And, Elena?" "Make sure your resources are available if the meeting doesn't achieve the desired outcome." Elena pulled out her phone and began making calls. Sarah sat back in her chair and began planning for a conversation that would determine whether she could continue living as a suburban mother, or whether she would need to become someone much more dangerous. The meeting was arranged for the following evening at a coffee shop in neutral territory, away from both Sarah's neighborhood and Castellanos' family territory. Elena had chosen the location carefully, a busy place with multiple exits, security cameras, and enough ambient noise to prevent electronic surveillance. Sarah arrived 30 minutes early and positioned herself at a table near the back exit, with clear sight lines to all entrances. She wore dark jeans, a fitted jacket, and boots that would allow for quick movement if necessary. To casual observers, she looked like any other suburban mother meeting a friend for coffee. But, underneath her civilian clothes, Sarah was carrying equipment she hadn't used in years. A ceramic knife that wouldn't set off metal detectors. A small communications device connected to Elena's surveillance team. And a confidence born from years of training in situations far more dangerous than a coffee shop meeting with a small-time criminal family. Maria Castellanos arrived precisely on time, accompanied by two men who positioned themselves at the counter while she approached Sarah's table. Maria was a woman in her late 40s, with graying hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She moved with the controlled confidence of someone who was used to being in charge. "Ms. Martinez," Maria said, sitting down across from Sarah. "I understand you wanted to discuss the situation with my family." "I wanted to discuss ending the situation with your family," Sarah replied directly. "Before it escalates further." Maria studied Sarah carefully, taking note of her posture, her positioning, and the way her eyes constantly tracked movement throughout the coffee shop. "You don't act like a physical therapist." "I am a physical therapist," Sarah said. "But I wasn't always." "What were you before?" Sarah met Maria's gaze steadily. "Someone who protected American interests overseas. Someone who eliminated threats that couldn't be handled through normal diplomatic channels." Maria's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. "You're claiming to be military."
I'm not claiming anything, Sarah said.
I'm telling you that your nephew Jimmy and his friends made a serious mistake when they threatened my son. And I'm giving you an opportunity to end this situation before it becomes much worse for your family.
Worse how? Sarah leaned forward slightly.
Mrs. Castellanos, your husband is in prison. Your nephew is an idiot who can barely plan a simple robbery. Your organization is held together by fear and tradition, but you don't have the resources to protect your people from someone with my skill set.
Maria's jaw tightened. Are you threatening my family?
I'm explaining the reality of the situation, Sarah replied.
You have two choices.
End this conflict now, with your family intact and your reputation preserved. Or continue this conflict and discover that suburban mothers can be much more dangerous than you expected. My family's reputation requires a response to what happened in that parking garage, Maria said.
Jimmy was humiliated. That can't go unanswered. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Maria a photograph.
It was a picture of Carlos Webb sitting in his car outside Tommy's school that afternoon, clearly taken from an elevated position with a high-powered camera.
Your response put my son at risk, Sarah said quietly. That changes the rules of engagement. Maria looked at the photograph, then at Sarah.
Where did you get this picture?
The same place I got this one, Sarah said, showing Maria a second photograph.
This one showed Maria herself leaving her house that morning, also taken from a concealed position with professional-grade surveillance equipment.
Maria's composure cracked slightly. You've been watching my family. Mrs. Castellanos, if I wanted to hurt your family, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
You would simply receive a series of phone calls informing you that people you care about had disappeared. The threat was delivered in Sarah's calmest voice, which made it more chilling than any dramatic declaration would have been. Maria had spent years around dangerous men, but she recognized something in Sarah's tone that was qualitatively different from street-level intimidation.
What do you want? Maria asked. I want your family to leave mine alone. Permanently.
No more surveillance, no more attempts at intimidation, no more revenge plots.
Jimmy and his friends made their choice and faced the consequences. The matter ends there. And, in return?
In return, your family continues to exist, Sarah said simply.
All of them.
Maria was quiet for a long moment, considering her options. She had built her power on the principle that challenges to her family's authority had to be answered with force. But she was also smart enough to recognize when she was facing someone who operated by different rules.
How do I know you're not bluffing? Maria asked finally. Sarah pulled out a third photograph. This one showed the interior of Carlos's prison cell, with Carlos himself clearly visible lying on his bunk.
The photo had been taken from inside the prison, which should have been impossible for a civilian to arrange. Your husband has been safe in prison because no one has had a reason to reach him there, Sarah said.
That could change very quickly if this situation continues to escalate. Maria stared at the photograph, understanding the implications.
If Sarah could get surveillance photos from inside a maximum security prison, she could get other things inside as well.
Things that could eliminate Carlos permanently. You're not just threatening my street family, Maria realized. You're threatening everyone I care about. I'm offering to protect everyone you care about, Sarah corrected. By ending this conflict before it forces me to take actions that can't be undone. Maria looked at her two bodyguards, then, back at Sarah. What guarantee do I have that you won't use this information against my family in the future?
The same guarantee you're giving me that your family won't threaten my son in the future, Sarah replied.
None. We're both choosing to trust that ending this conflict serves everyone's best interests. And, if someone in my family doesn't accept this arrangement? Sarah's expression hardened.
Then, you'll need to decide whether their need for revenge is worth the survival of your organization. Maria sat back in her chair, processing the full scope of what Sarah was offering and threatening. She had expected to negotiate with a civilian who could be intimidated or bought off. Instead, she was facing someone who had clearly done this kind of negotiation before, in circumstances that made family criminal disputes look like playground arguments. "I'll need to discuss this with my advisors," Maria said finally. "You have until tomorrow evening," Sarah replied. "After that, I assume the conflict is continuing and act accordingly." "And what happens to the criminal charges against Jimmy and the others?" "That depends on whether they represent a continuing threat to my family," Sarah said. "If this matter is truly resolved, I'm willing to consider that their current legal troubles are sufficient consequence for their actions." Maria stood up from the table, followed by her bodyguards. "Ms. Martinez, you've given me a lot to think about." "Mrs. Castellanos," Sarah said without getting up, "I hope you make the right decision. For everyone's sake." After Maria and her men left the coffee shop, Sarah remained at her table for another 10 minutes, finishing her coffee and observing the other customers. Elena's surveillance team had confirmed that no additional Castellanos associates were in the area, but Sarah's training made her cautious about assuming she was safe. When Sarah finally left the coffee shop, she drove a circuitous route home, checking for surveillance and thinking about the meeting. Maria Castellanos was smart and experienced, but she was also operating under constraints that Sarah didn't have. Maria had to consider the opinions of other family members, the expectations of her criminal associates, and the impact of her decisions on a complex organization. Sarah only had to consider one factor: protecting Tommy by whatever means necessary. That evening, after Tommy was asleep, Sarah sat in her living room and made one more phone call to Captain Walsh in San Diego. "How did the negotiation go?" Walsh asked. "Better than expected," Sarah said. "But I may need resources if the other party decides not to accept the terms." "What kind of resources?" "The kind we used to handle problems that couldn't be solved through conventional means." Captain Walsh was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, are you sure you want to cross that line in civilian life? Once you do, there's no going back to being just a suburban mother." "I stopped being just a suburban mother when they threatened Tommy," Sarah replied. "Now I'm a suburban mother with a very specific skill set." "Fair enough," Walsh said. "If you need backup, I can have people in your area within 6 hours." "Hopefully it won't come to that," Sarah said. "But, thank you." The next day passed slowly. Sarah took Tommy to school, ran errands, and tried to maintain their normal routine while staying alert for any signs that the Castellanos family had made their decision. Elena's surveillance team reported no unusual activity around Sarah's house or Tommy's school, but that could mean either that the family had decided to end the conflict or that they were planning something more sophisticated. That evening, as Sarah was helping Tommy with his homework, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Elena's number. "Decision time," Elena said when Sarah answered. "Tony Castellanos wants to meet with you. Same place as last night, 1 hour." "Tony, not Maria?" "Apparently Maria has delegated the final negotiation to him. My sources say there was a family meeting this afternoon that got pretty heated." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and concern. If Maria had sent Tony to negotiate, it probably meant the family was leaning toward ending the conflict. But it could also mean they were buying time to plan a more effective response. "I'll be there," Sarah said. An hour later, Sarah was back at the coffee shop, sitting at the same table as the night before. Tony Castellanos arrived alone, which was either a good sign or a sign that the family was very confident about their backup plans. Tony looked tired and stressed as he sat down across from Sarah. "Ms. Martinez, my family has decided to accept your proposal." "Which proposal specifically?" "We leave you and your son alone. You drop the criminal charges. And this whole situation ends." Sarah studied Tony's face, looking for signs of deception. "What about your Uncle Jimmy? And the others?" "Uncle Jimmy is moving to Nevada tomorrow. Rico Morales is going back to Mexico to stay with family. Marcus Webb and his brother are being told to find business in a different city." "And what guarantee do I have that they won't return?" Tony pulled out a handwritten letter and placed it on the table. "This is signed by my Aunt Maria and witnessed by 3 family elders. It states that the Castellanos family considers this matter closed and will take no action against you or your family.
It also states that anyone who violates this agreement will be considered an enemy of the family.
Sarah read the letter carefully. It was written in formal Spanish and English, with language that would be legally binding in any court. More importantly, it was written in terms that would be understood and respected by other criminal families who might consider taking action against Sarah in the future.
Why did your family decide to accept these terms? Sarah asked.
Tony was quiet for a moment, then said, because Aunt Maria believes you're exactly who you say you are. And because she doesn't want to find out what happens if this conflict continues. Sarah folded the letter and put it in her purse. Mr. Castellanos, I want you to understand something very clearly. This agreement protects your family as much as it protects mine.
If anyone connected to your organization threatens my son again, I won't negotiate a second time. I understand, Tony said. And, Ms. Martinez?
I'm sorry about what my uncle did. He's always been the dumbest one in the family, but he's still family.
Family is important, Sarah agreed.
That's why I'm willing to accept this agreement instead of eliminating all potential threats immediately. Tony left the coffee shop, and Sarah remained at her table for a few more minutes, considering whether she believed the conflict was truly over. The Castellanos family had made a rational decision based on an accurate assessment of the threat she represented. But rationality and family loyalty didn't always coincide in criminal organizations.
Sarah pulled out her phone and called Elena.
The family has agreed to end the conflict. I'm going to proceed as if the agreement is genuine, but I want your surveillance team to remain active for another month.
Understood, Elena said. And, Sarah? You handled this perfectly.
You showed enough strength to make them respect the threat, but left them enough dignity to accept the terms. As Sarah drove home, she felt a complex mixture of emotions.
Relief that the immediate threat to Tommy was resolved. Satisfaction that she had successfully used her skills to protect her family.
And a strange sadness that she had been forced to become someone other than the suburban mother she had tried to be. When Sarah arrived home, she found Tommy asleep on the couch with one of his science books open on his chest. She carefully moved the book and covered him with a blanket, then sat beside him and watched him sleep. Tomorrow, she would call Detective Santos and indicate that she was willing to consider plea agreements for Jimmy Castellanos and his associates. She would return to her job search and try to rebuild the normal life that had been disrupted by a chance encounter in a parking garage. But Sarah also knew that something fundamental had changed. She was no longer just a physical therapist who happened to have military experience. She was a mother who had demonstrated that she would use any means necessary to protect her child. That knowledge would shape every decision she made going forward. Tommy stirred in his sleep and mumbled something about volcanoes. Sarah smiled and brushed his hair away from his forehead. Her son was safe, and their normal life could continue. But if anyone ever threatened her family again, they would discover that some suburban mothers were more dangerous than they appeared. 2 weeks later, Sarah received a job offer from a rehabilitation center in the suburbs, far from downtown and the Castellanos family territory. The position came with a higher salary and better benefits, along with a recommendation from Dr. Coleman that praised Sarah's exceptional ability to handle difficult situations. Sarah accepted the job and moved her family to a house in a neighborhood with better schools and more security. Tommy adapted quickly to the change, making new friends and joining the school's science club.
6 months later, Sarah received a wedding invitation in the mail.
Tony Castellanos was marrying his girlfriend and moving to Denver to start an auto repair business. The invitation included a handwritten note, "Thank you for giving our family a second chance." Sarah smiled as she read the note, then filed it away with other reminders that sometimes the most dangerous conflicts could be resolved without anyone having to die. But she also kept her storage unit across town, with its carefully maintained collection of equipment and contacts. Because being a suburban mother was her first choice, but protecting Tommy would always be her only choice. And, in a world where dangerous people sometimes made very bad decisions, it was good to be prepared for anything.